This is our Tempera Painting Sampler exercise. So you're going to need to grab a paint tray for your table. You should have a little spoon in there so you can scoop your paint. You're going to want your palette paper, brushes, and then possibly a palette knife. And then most importantly, you're going to need 2 cups of water. One for clean water to mix into the paint, and then one for dirty. So you're going to wash your brushes in the dirty cup. It's very important you have 2 so you don't have to keep getting up all the time while you start painting. Alright, so get your sampler page. So I have a few different brushes, a few different flats. I have palette knife, I have my waters, and then my page. I have paper towels. So I have everything I need. So this is a round brush. It's a size 10. I have a bunch of different brushes there, so get a couple rounds, a couple flats, just so you can practice the different shapes. So we're going to start with a flat stroke. So I put a little bit of the clean water, so the one on the right is going to be my clean water, and I'm going to take a little bit of the red, and then I'm just going to, using a little bit of pressure, just pull, pull, pull with the brush, and then it's going to make a nice line. So on the second one, I'm going to use the tip of the brush so you can see the different types of lines that brush will make. So the one on the left is my dirty water, so I'm going to clean only in the left one. If I'm adding water to paint, I use the right, and then I'm going to dry it off with a paper towel. So let's try this with a round brush. So this time I'm going to use the blue. I'm just going to scoop it. I always put my paint I'm mixing in a different area from the original color. So I try not to mix colors into those original colors. So clean water, a little bit of water so you can practice. Then I'm just going to pull. And then so sometimes I want a little more water. You want enough so it flows good. And then you can see the type of line the round brush is going to make. So now let's use the tip of the brush to see what kind of line that makes. I'm adding a little bit more paint. There we go. Then again, I'm going to clean it in the dirty water one on the left. So I have one specifically to clean, one to add to the paint. And this is going to make it so you don't have to get up all the time to keep dumping out your water. So the next thing we're going to practice is a flip-flop. So you want a flat brush for that. And to do the flip-flop, you're going to put half your brush in one color and half in the other. And then you're just going to pull with your brush. And then what will happen is it'll make this nice little gradient like a stripe. That's like a trick some artists that paint flowers and things do to make it like this nice little blend. And then now I'm going to try it with the yellow and the red. See the difference. And then this time I'm going to use a palette knife. So when you use a palette knife, you can scoop from your piles of paint and try not to contaminate your original hue. You also don't like to, it isn't great to mix with the brush because it gets all over the ferrule of the brush and it gets up in there. So you want to try to use a palette knife if possible. So I'm doing half and half like before. Then I'm just going to pull, and that makes a really nice little gradient right there. And then it's a little dry right there, so I'm going to add a little bit more paint and then make another line right down there. So we're also practicing the quality of the paint, how much water to add, what happens when you add too much, not enough. So now we're going to practice some techniques, so stippling and a dry brush, which is kind of the same except the shape. So I'm going to make a darker value. So I'm going to add a little bit of black over there. So remember, when you mix a darker value, you want a lot more of the hue and a little bit of black. So I'm just scooping with the palette knife instead of my brush, then I just wipe it off. Mix, mix, mix. it becomes especially important if you're using acrylic paint to use a palette knife, because that acrylic paint can dry in a brush and ruin it. So I'm just adding a little more of each. Wipe, wipe, wipe. And then the first one is supposed to be dark over light. So can you guess the mistake I'm making right now? So to fill that square, I take a flat and I brush it up to the edge and I just pull with the brush and I try to keep it in a line and then I overlap the line. So that's how I create a crisp edge. I take the brush edge to the edge of the square and then I just pull. And I try to do like one even pull. I don't like scrub it. I try to flow really nice with the brush. So flats are really nice for filling areas, getting edges. So we'll see in a second. Can you figure out what mistake I'm making though? I'm going to figure it out about now. It was supposed to be dark over light, and I'm painting that whole square a dark color. So what I'm going to do is just rewrite it light over dark. So when we make a mistake, we just figure out a solution and we move on. So those two on my sheet are going to be switched. So if you're following along with me, hopefully you didn't make that same mistake, but if you did, just rewrite the words. All right, so for the rest of painting these squares, I am just going to speed this up a little bit. Okay, and then with the dry brush, it's the same thing. I'm just using paint with not very much water. It's dry. And then I'm just going to paint over the top. So this is how you could do details, add highlights. So just another technique to use. But you could see that mine is not that dry. Like I didn't wait for that blue square to dry enough. So my yellow is kind of mixing a little bit into the blue. So please make sure that it's completely dry before you get going on that. So if it's not, just start to work on the sphere next. All right, so to do the sphere, this is just like remember shading with a pencil or anything else. So I'm going to need a middle tone, a tint for the highlight, a shade for the shadow, and then pay attention to where the light is coming in. So I have to adjust it a little bit as I go. So I kind of mix up my colors first, or my values first. And you can use a round brush, a flat brush. Really, this becomes like what you're comfortable using. And then I'm going to speed this up just a little bit so you don't have to watch me mix paint. All right, so I'm laying down just my mid-tone, and then I'm going to go over the top with a highlight. So I like to mix and blend the paint, so it's kind of called wet on wet. You can also wait for it to dry and use a dry brush to add highlights. It's all kind of up to you, but just remember how the light hits a sphere and how we shade it. So I'm taking the tint, and then it's kind of wet brush with a wet brush, and then I'm just going to blend it right on the paper. Then you can see as I go to the bottom of the sphere, I like change the pressure on my brush. So now I'm cleaning it off a little bit. And then I kind of realized that the highlight should be a little bit higher, so I kind of fixed that. So now I'm going back in with the middle, and you can see I'm kind of just playing with the blending. And then I'm pulling it up. And that's when I kind of figure out, oops, I need to make the highlight a little bit higher. And this is kind of one of my favorite things to do, is just blending wet paint with wet paint and just making those gradations. And then as I get to the shade, I'll add the shadow in. And then if it doesn't look quite the way you want, just let it dry and you can paint right over it. So I'm going to go to the shadow. So I'm adding some black, remember, to the blue to make the shadow. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm working on the highlight. My bad. So I'm adding a little bit of white in there. And I'm just like lightly grazing it. And pulling it. And then you can clean off your brush and kind of paint with a clean brush to help blend it even more. So these are some really good skills to have to learn how to paint. So now I'm adding that shadow in. I'm playing around with using the tip of the brush. So I'm constantly kind of like cleaning it off, adding a little more paint. Then I'm using that edge to get a crisp edge. And then I'll go back and blend that shadow. There we go. And then I just need to do the shadow at the bottom and give it a little highlight or reflected light. So let me speed this up a little bit. Alright, so I'm adding that little reflected light in there, and I'm using a round brush. So I switched my brush because I wanted it to be small and I don't want that big edge. So a round brush with especially a smaller size is really good for adding details. And then I'm going back in, trying to make that shadow, add a little bit more black, really dark, to make my sphere stand out, look 3D. And then again, you can let it dry as you go. If you make a mistake, no worries. But now I'm just going to refine it a little bit. So I'm adding a little more in there. You can see I add a little bit of white. And then just kind of playing around with the blend, going back in. Because sometimes, you know, as it dries, the value will change a little bit, so. Alright, now I'm going to go back and finish those two stippling and dry brush that I fully let those two squares dry. So these are dark over light, so this is the same thing, except I'm doing dark over light. And for your dry brush, you can make any shape you want. It doesn't really matter. Alright, so yours should look something like mine. You could use whatever colors or hues you want, and I don't really care, as long as you get all this practice in for our next project. So I can't wait to see what you guys do. Remember, if you have any questions, ask. And when you're finished with this, make sure you check off with me in class. Good job.